Hello, you are all hugely welcome to this session where we are going to look at the youth employment recruitment trends, what we've seen across 2024 and what we anticipate and expect for 2025. I'm Laura Mistry, I'm the Deputy CEO at Youth Employment UK. I am joined by our CEO, Laura Jane Rawlins, who will share and support across this session too. She isn't just here to showcase the background of, of the office. We are recording today's session. This recording will be made available and publicly accessible on our website. I do love to see your faces, but if us recording this means that you need to remove your face for any reason, that is okay. Today's slides will also be made available post-event. Please use the chat bot, introduce yourself, ask questions. We are hoping to be able to finish early enough for you to ask questions and get into discussions. If we don't get the time to answer all of them today, what we will do is use the chat bot, the chat box to come back to you post-event too. So without further ado, let's get into youth employment recruitment trends with us, Youth Employment UK. In terms of who we are, where this data set comes from, where this intelligence and insight we're about to share with you today comes from, is all of the work that we have been doing across 2024 as youth employment experts at Youth Employment UK, but steeped in a 14-year history, if my maths is correct, as a not-for-profit community interest company. Youth Employment UK is driven by its mission to ensure that young people can access quality opportunities to fulfill and achieve their potential. We do this in a number of ways, not least through the support of organisations that join us as members. They do that so they can share in our insight, and we're able to provide them with guidance, best practice support and access to our Good Youth Employment benchmark, which monitors and measures their activity. For young people, we're a trusted space for sharing their voice. So a lot of the youth-focused and facing information that we'll share with you today is shared actively with us, not just as kind of the authors of the Youth Voice Census every year, but also in other smaller qualitative sessions that we constantly run throughout the year and through the support of our Youth Ambassador programme. We have a series of careers, skills and employability, content support and modular learning for young people aged 11 to 30, and our expertise across policy, not least as the chair or the secretariat of the all-party parliamentary group for youth employment, and as a co-chair of the youth employment group, but also in the other research activity and policy relationships that we hold. All of that comes together to provide us with a unique set of data, intelligence, and insight into what's really happening for all of the audiences that come together to make a difference for youth employment. So I'll let you sit back, have a cup of tea, as LJ will run through now the landscape and where we are at. Following that, we will look at where young people are at right now, the trends for 2025, workplace expectations, and how we can help support employers and organisations to engage more young people in their workforce. LJ.
Great. Thanks so much, Lauren, and welcome everybody. So as Lauren says, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the current landscape which we are operating in. So those of you that are familiar with the youth employment landscape in particular will know that at the most recent count of those young people who are not in education, employment or training that came out in November this year, we saw an 8% rise from the previous quarter's data set to 946,000 of our young people not in education, employment or training. So 946,000 young people are NEET. It was a pretty stark slap for me actually when that data came out, because Youth Employment UK was founded at a time when we had the highest levels of NEET young people on record, which was 1 million back in 2011. So that was a rise that had been and come about because of the global recession from the 2008 crash. And young people are most often, when there's an economic turbulence, they're most often the group that are widely affected by employment trends and employer behaviour. So in 2011, we had 1 million NEET young people, and here we are in 2024, nearly knocking on that door again. I think what's really worrying for us about that trend is that we expect it likely to continue into 25 on an upward trajectory. I think we are going to indeed surpass the 1 million marker by around July time, when the sort of Q1 data is released, which will be July. It's always released a quarter behind. So I think when we get into the July's data set for Q1 of 2025, we will see that that ticker number has gone up and over 1 million young people. And of course, it's because of all the turbulence we've seen over the last few years, but no doubt a compounding factor, particularly as we go into 25, will be the businesses really thinking about what they're going to do and what they can afford to do around hiring and cost increases, both with the national living wage increase that affects young people at the lower rate bands, but also at the same time huge policy areas coming around the employment law changes, but also of course the national insurance contributions that will see an increase to many businesses in April 25. What that will do alongside this kind of economic uncertainty that we're hearing about is make businesses more cautious about what they might do around hiring young people. Now, for me as a leader of Youth Employment UK, that sends alarm bells and shivers in every single way, because too often we hear employers talking about workforce gaps, skill gaps, and what we know, particularly when we look back at what happened in 2011, 2012, is that when employers stop hiring, when they are ready to rehire, the skills aren't necessarily in the system. Young people's confidence is low. Their time spent as a neat young person has a real scarring impact on who they are, how they feel about the world around them, and the future career choices that they will make. So if we don't keep encouraging that stimulation to come from employers, they will face the brunt of that kind of when the sort of economic confidence increases. So it's a real conversation that we're having both with the policymakers we work with, but also our members, to say, look, you have to keep making the case on the return of investment for continuing to bring on young people into your businesses today, tomorrow, and in the future months ahead. Because actually, the minute we stop making that investment, it comes back in a different way for business growth projections in the future. So really interesting in terms of kind of what we're seeing from kind of the global economy. In terms of who are our neat young people, we're going to get a little bit into this through Lauren's presentation. So I'm not going to cover it too much in terms of their insights that they're sharing with us in terms of the Youth Voice census. But essentially on the surface, what we can see is there was a real growth in young men becoming neat. We've been talking about a mental health crisis for a long time now at Youth Employment UK. I think we first saw the massive upturn in about 2019 in the Youth Voice census data of young people reporting a decline in their mental health and an increase in their anxiety levels. We are really seeing that amongst young men. And young men who are sort of deselecting themselves from opportunities, they are contributing significantly to the economic inactivity levels that we're seeing, but also here in these neat levels. So there is some troubling data about that upward trend. And interestingly, young women are certainly starting to grab more of those opportunities. They're getting more involved in volunteering. They're getting more involved in skill development. They're getting more involved in kind of choices around education and training in a really positive way. And it isn't an offset of what young men are choosing. It is just a very different environment around those two genders. So we also see, though, in the NEAT data, kind of those who are mostly affected are Black Caribbean young people. We know that ethnicity really matters. We hear that a lot in young people talking about discrimination on their transition to work, and race and ethnicity really does have a bearing still on young people's career trajectory and the opportunities available to them, as does the location. So, we absolutely still know that there are places around the country that have never leveled up and where there are scarce opportunities. Our coastal towns, our old industrial towns, the mining towns of the northeast, have really never bounced back in terms of the number of opportunities and the growth of their economies. And so, of course, that's where we see these higher trends in youth unemployment data. I think one of the things that's really interesting, though, about that is we shouldn't just look at it on a, kind of macro regional level, because actually youth unemployment really shifts at a hyper-local level. And by hyper-local, I mean even down to the wards, the postcodes, the streets. If you think about where you live, and I certainly know this from where we're based in Kettering, you have some really affluent streets. The streets that I used to drive past as a kid going, oh, I want to live in a house like that when I grow up, all the way through to our clusters where we have higher deprivation amongst those who live there. So even down to ward level, there is quite a difference, but certainly at that macro regional level, the northeast continues to hit the top spot. And we've got that kind of increased diversity around the changing demography. I think it's really important to think about the diversity of these young people and the intersectionality. The problem with youth unemployment, and like all unemployment, is that it's really complex. There's not one single thing that's going to solve this. There's not one thing that all young people need, because what we absolutely know is that all young people have very individual needs. I mean, that's perhaps the only thing they have in common is their individuality. And so you can't just say, right, we're going to create this type of work program and that will solve it, or we're going to create this type of apprenticeship because that will solve it. Because actually, it's about health, it's about place, it's about those personal characteristics, it's about who your parents are, it's about what school you went to and how successful that experience was for you, whether or not you had a careers advisor and work experience going on. It is a very individual experience these young people are having. One of the things that we did, I think it was back in 2023 here at Youth Employment UK, we banned the term Gen Z simply on that basis, that actually when we think about inclusion, when we think about solving this problem, what we should never do is look at an entire cohort of young people and decide that's what's going to happen to them, whether that's on your recruitment practice as an employer, the services you're creating as a youth charity, or anything else in between. We have to think much more holistically about our young people and think about those systems and structures around them. We know this year only 60% of our young people passed English and Maths GCSE first time. In parts of Birmingham and the West Midlands, it was nearly 52% of young people who didn't get English and Maths first time. So there are some sort of parts of the country where that's an even lower achievement rate than the national average. Now, if 60% of our young people are passing English and Maths first time at GCSE, that means 40% are not. And those young people then are almost completely prohibited to move on to an apprenticeship, because we're looking at entry-level requirements that exceed an English and Maths pass rate, or they're prohibited from moving on to a T-level or a higher level, level 3 qualification, and get into a potential retake system, which is not particularly successful either. So for colleges and those providers that are supporting young people with English and Maths, you'll know that actually the pass rate on retakes is less than that 60%. It's a lot of hard work to continue to have a young person going through a system that didn't work first time and finding a way through for a second or third attempt. So understanding all of that complexity is our job at Youth Employment UK. It's one of the reasons why we are the experts, because we can put all of those components together: the place, the system, the structure, the individual barriers that young people face. And then we can start to build pictures for our employers and our members and the policy work that we do based on that real insight. Lauren, what's on my next slide? Back in the days. So policy plans, I think this is kind of a big area that I've been leading on for Youth Employment UK this year. And no doubt general election year is a super busy year for any organisation that wants to try and influence change. It's a busy year for any organisation, full stop, but certainly busy for us here, who have had to build new relationships with this government and the civil servants that they brought in, and get to understand kind of what their focus is and how we can support them with our insight, research and network. It's been a really interesting period of time, actually. So just before the general election, as all of the political parties were building up their manifestos, Youth Employment UK, as part of the Youth Employment Group, which is our policy lobbying group that we co-chair, wrote a paper called the Youth Guarantee, a Young Person's Guarantee. We wrote that paper back in 2022, and across 23 and into the earlier part of 24, we've been talking to all of the political parties about building a youth guarantee, a young person guarantee. Labour were the only political party to put it into their manifesto that they would commit to a young person guarantee. And now, since winning the general election, they have really kind of put economic growth and breaking down barriers to opportunity as part of their 5 missions where the Youth Guarantee plays its part. And I'll just kind of talk a little bit about some of those big political areas and the things that we're anticipating coming. So for our members at Youth Employment UK, you will benefit from a quarterly webinar, at least, where our policy and research team come and present what's going on, what's moving, what we're working on, and what conversations we're having behind closed doors with officials. And it's a really important part of our membership benefit. So for some of you, this won't be new news. But certainly what we're having those conversations with the Department for Education, the Department for Work and Pensions in particular, is about the Get Britain Working paper, which comes into both the economic growth strategy and the breaking down barriers to opportunity strategy as part of the two core missions to the Labour Party. So the Get Britain Working paper, which was released in November, centres on how we can tackle the rising number, 3 million people not in any form of employment, who are economically inactive. Some of those 3 million are claiming job seeker support. Some of those people, and this is an all-age approach, all-age point, some of those people are completely outside of the support system, and some of those people have just absolutely deselected themselves from wanting to look for work and to be in work. There's a hiring age range of people who are retiring out of the system. Lucky for them, I say. But we have a real problem with 3 million people who are economically inactive in terms of where the workforce productivity is going to come from, and the burden of the state cost of having people on benefits and not contributing to taxable income for the investment that the government want to have. So it's become a real core mission to this government to get those people into some form of work. And Labour are talking about quality work, which is a real shift and change in some of the narrative. That quality of work is sitting around their New Deal for working people, which are all the employment right bill changes that are coming through. And I'm sure many of you will know what's coming down the line for your organisations. But rights from day one, being considered as an employee, the removal of 0-hour contracts, and the minimum wage and pay increases as well to make work pay for those people that are in it. So there is a lot happening in and around that kind of piece to make sure that work is paying, so that people who are on benefits see the kind of benefit of going to work and having a good job. We know it's good for all of us. Actually, having a good job that makes you feel productive within a good organisation fulfills your day, fulfills your life, builds you connections that you can't have when you're economically inactive. And certainly that's the worry we have for our neat young people who are not engaging in any of that form of kind of good collaboration, good connections, purposeful days. It becomes a slippery slope to full disengagement. So that is all kind of part of the drive that we'll see over the coming year or two ahead, is how do we get our economically inactive people and young people into work. The young people element of the Get Britain Working Plan was indeed the delivery of a youth guarantee, or the beginnings of a youth guarantee. What the Labour Party have committed to is to ensure that all young people will receive the support to find an education or a training opportunity, or they will have access to a good college, a good course, a good training opportunity, a apprenticeship, or a job, a good job in employment. And where they've started out with this, it's a really big policy area. It's really quite complicated. So their first approach to this is to lead with 8 trailblazer groups. So what they're doing is putting funding into 8 of the combined authorities to trial different approaches. I think the most interesting thing about that approach is, one, they want employers to be part of it. So those combined authorities have got to work with the local skills improvement plan, they've got to work with the education system and work with employers to see what is a viable service for young people that's going to engage with them and move them into employment. The most interesting bit for me, though, in all of that is the inclusion of the health service and the inclusion of the crime service and the inclusion of the housing service. What Labour have, if you like, recognised is that actually you just can't pick somebody up and move them into a job if they're living in some form of crisis. They have a mental health crisis, if they've got a housing crisis. And that is a really important note that comes through for me, is that they are looking more holistically at why people have become economically inactive and what we can do about systems change at a real local level. So we're working with some of the combined authorities, West Midlands, who I know are here on this call today, Greater Manchester, and some of the others, to really help think about how that trailblazer can work and what is the evidence of intervention, both by employers but by system change organisations, that will help shift the dial and give those young people the skills, the confidence, the tools and the pathways into good education, training or employment opportunities. Super interesting that that's kind of the first trailblazers. £240 million came out of the budget to deliver on that. And probably that's where the money is going to be spent from this Labour Party in terms of real investment into economic growth and moving people into employment. I think that probably covers what I see as the big policy plans and what I think are going to be the big drivers around young people and employers in the year ahead. What I probably would just say is, as this webinar is all about the trends, is as an employer, thinking about how you can create good quality opportunities and work with those trailblazers is where I'd be spending my money. Because that's what the future is going to look like and where you're going to need to be. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. And so that's the landscape, the big numbers, the overarching plans that we expect to see and come out. And as part of, just to sort of recognise the next part of the session and what we're talking about next is where young people are at right now, and I can really appreciate the juxtaposition between employers being handed national insurance rises, raising the minimum wage, and thinking about day one workers' rights. And what I'm about to go through and work with you is the changes that, again, employers will need to make within organisations to be youth ready. And it is, of course, vitally important that work is good, that actually it's a good place to be, that it pays fairly and that it pays well. But I can absolutely appreciate from an employer perspective, and what we're here to do at Youth Employment UK is really work to understand what that youth employment strategy means for you as an organisation, where you are, who you're looking to hire and who you're looking to work with. Of course, we can't personalise that for each and every person that's watching this webinar today, but it is what our membership is for. We can talk overall and overarching around what this might mean for apprentices joining your organisation, what it might mean for graduates joining your organisation, and of course those entry-level staff and additional programmes or supported internships you might run. But we'll be able to share that big view and what that might mean, and be able to work. We are, as an organisation, through our benchmark, working with employers of all sizes to make marginal gains. Not all of this is going to change overnight, but actually there are things we can do in every programme that an employer runs that means it's that bit more accessible to a target audience that you haven't reached yet, you haven't been able to just attract and engage or retain within your organisation or the organisation that you support. With that said, the Youth Voice Census that we launched in September this year gave us a moment. It's always a really refreshing moment, and I will try and make this the last slide where we talk about devastating numbers and devastating impacts on young people. But the Youth Voice Census is always a really sobering moment for us at Youth Employment UK. It provides us with a national view of how young people are feeling about lots of different things. So it asks some questions about who they are, where they live, the access to employment support they may have had, and their experiences in work, and everything in between. This year's Youth Voice Census and the cohort that completed it were our most anxious group of young people that we have ever seen complete the Youth Voice Census. We all know of the rising mental health and wellbeing challenges young people are facing. What we found this year is not just worrying numbers of anxiety, but the most amount of young people who are the most anxious. So when you ask them to rate how anxious they're feeling on a scale of 1 to 10, more young people are most anxious most days. In fact, there's only 6% of young people that had no sense of anxiety in the 24 hours before they completed the census. That anxiety is at its highest when young people are transitioning into their next steps. And for some part, that's an acceptable moment. We should live and work under some level of anxiety and some level of stress as our life changes. But actually, the kind of frequency and the level of anxiety that young people reach as they're transitioning into further education, higher education, or in work, it's not just age related, but depending on the stage they were moving to, it's at its highest. It makes it then really difficult for those young people to know and accept help or be able to think about other choices. If they are at that high level anxiety and they've started on a college course that isn't right for them, it is the worst possible time to think about new choices, to think about new opportunities, to think about new options. It can often leave them stuck and spiraling because they can't think about what's next for them. We think about discrimination and the financial concerns that young people had too. And people are anxious about what's next for them. They're anxious about their future and they're anxious for what their life might be. Part of that is down to finance, money, worrying that they'll never be able to buy a house. But actually, a lot of it is how unsafe they feel, where they study, where they work, where they live, and traveling in and around those areas. Safety and those financial conversations with young people directly impact what they think they can access next. A lot of the young people who had thought about changing the course that they were on, leaving their apprenticeship, leaving their current job, was purely down to either finance or a safety aspect of being able to get there on time, on a bus that works, or feeling like they could walk to where they needed to actually work on a daily or weekly basis for them. Discrimination as an additional factor for young people this year. It was something young people asked us to start monitoring in last year's Youth Voice Census, and actually more of a growing concern as we think about a workforce that will have 4 generations working all and in at the same time. It is a real worry for young people that they feel like they are discriminated against, the language that they're hearing, particularly around young boys and misogyny across not just the education system, but in work too, is really worrying and something that we are looking at and monitoring closely. It is a trend I anticipate seeing much more of in the Youth Voice Census for 2025. That said, and those level of anxiety, that safety, those financial concerns, those moments where young people are really worried about staying in the situation they're in, but worried about moving out of it and it being equally as unstable or unsettling for them, is that the readiness to make those next step decisions has also dropped for young people. Partly down to having less access to opportunities, less places and spaces to grow their skills and think about local access to whether it be youth clubs, sports clubs. There are less places and spaces, young people believe, for them to really explore who they are, what skills they currently have, and in which ways they might need to develop them in the future. Those opportunities in terms of opening them up, there's huge disparity across the UK in terms of what young people can get access to because of their postcode. But in addition, young people with free school meals or who have ever been eligible for free school meals will have less access. Our Black Caribbean respondents will have had less access to any of those ways and places to grow opportunities, to grow skills, as will young women. What's really interesting about that is that they aren't always the groups of people who are less confident. getting more opportunities doesn't always increase your confidence of knowing what you want to do in the future, or knowing what knowing that your current choice is a good one for you. Having more opportunities is always a good thing, but it is about the right opportunities. We saw this year that our Asian respondents were getting more careers education opportunities, which was boosting their confidence. They still get less than all of the others, but actually what they were getting was making a difference. They were getting quality opportunities to grow their skills, particularly when we look at regions like the West Midlands. Actually, we could see themselves as part of those opportunities. And there's something that I think we can take there in terms of what's happening across education, looking at the right moments, the right conversations, the right way to engage those young people, boosting their confidence and having more success that they will connect with that in the future. And I think as employers, we are getting a lot closer to being able to do that and understanding that that's the real difference maker. And overall, work is a really positive place for young people. We see workload stress and pressure increasing. And as we've hurtle towards the end of the year, I don't think any of us will disagree with that. Work is a really different place than it was when we first started. We used to have peaks and troughs. We used to have moments where it felt a little bit quieter, but actually pre-COVID, but certainly since COVID, our expectations, the way the workforce planning has been managed, actually more people are doing more jobs with less training than ever before. And for a young person that's got perhaps a new line manager, or a line manager that hasn't had any training themselves or any support, really leaves them really vulnerable to not really knowing what's happening, absorbing more work, and not being able to cope in those moments, and not also feeling like this is a place they want to stay and be retained because they're good. It feels like they'll just constantly get more and more work and never be trained for it too. So in terms of where young people are at right now, overall, that's where they are. But what is really interesting is we think about where we might be planning and what we might be looking at within our work programs is really important too. So what we found this year is for young people who are out of education, so that's everyone that's 19 plus but not in a university or higher education moment, their skills and confidence had increased in the 12 months leading up to the census. Their literacy skills, problem solving and listening skills were the top 3 skills they thought they had. They were more confident than anyone that was currently within education, that they understood the skills employers were looking for. I mean, it is still only 51%, so just over half of young people who are out of education, and therefore your prime audience right now, if you were recruiting, 51% think they understand the skills employers are looking for. Not all of them think they have those skills, and actually, as young people hit 19, what they tend to tell us is that whilst they believe their skills are improving, the literacy skills, the problem solving skills and the listening skills that they have are improving year on year, they feel as though when it is related to those employability skills, they're doing all they can to be able to increase them. But actually those that are going to interviews feel like it's so much more than that when they get in. It feels like they were told that if they improved those employability skills, they would get a job. And actually what it turns out as they kind of then sit in front of an employer is that they don't have work experience, so that's going to hold them back. Or actually the anxiety that they have when they either sit in front of an employer, or the anxiety that they have makes them believe that the job that they won't be able to be successful in this job, or a myriad of other reasons and expectations. They do also feel like they have to have every single skill and be able to showcase it and be able to bring that to an employer. Of those young people who are actively looking for work, they don't believe, particularly those who are looking for work right now, they are least likely to believe that an employer wants to hire them. There is a level of confidence while young people are still in education that, of course, employers are going to want to hire me. I'm learning these skills, I'm growing them, it's going to be okay. But actually, as soon as young people cross that threshold and they're out in those moments, they just don't believe it's them that employers want to hire. It's a real concern for next year too, as we think about the value of a £24,000 minimum wage employee. And young people are really worried about that. They're really worried about being worth that much, being valuable. They haven't across the last few years had those moments that give them confidence to say, okay, I am really good at this. And nobody tells young people what they're really good at and actually where they'll be able to thrive. Nobody builds those connections for them. And therefore, well, if you are an employer that isn't giving young people that guidance, you aren't telling them what your interview questions are going to be before they sit in front of you, they aren't able to build that evidence base. They aren't able to really think about themselves and be able to answer you or respond to you in the right way. For young people in education, their confidence in their skills has decreased. Really importantly, this year, we've seen a massive decrease in the numeracy skills of young people. It has been declining slowly, particularly since COVID-19, and the Youth Voice Census has 7 years of data, and a 6% drop in digital skills too. And really surprisingly, a 9% decline in listening skills for young people. Young people who are within education aren't always connecting or recollecting that actually they've learned something, they've been able to put it into practice, and they are least likely to think that they understand the skills employers are looking for. And actually, if we look across all of that data and all of those ages, it's 17 to 19-year-olds that are some of those least confident that think they'll be able to understand the skills employers are looking for, whether they're in education or not. And as they hit sort of 17 to 19, they just don't think they understand the skills, or there's a mismatch between employers wanting to hire them with the skills that they said they had, the skills they said they wanted when they were looking there too. And across the other side of the screen, what we have is for those young people who were looking for work, who were likely to be looking for work because they'd be exiting education or their current training course, these were the sectors that they were most interested in. These were the sectors and industries where they were currently looking for jobs. So we had 40% exploring retail, 33% business administration, and 30% creative. As we move down to the lower end of that, we have a lot of kind of hospitality and catering, protective services, hair and beauty. And what isn't on the slide is that just 9% of young people were considering engineering and manufacturing. The growth sectors, the industrial strategy sectors that we know we need to fill and look at are not being, I don't know if they're not being shown to young people, but they're certainly not seen as the routes that young people will be choosing in the next 12 months. And just to reiterate again, these are young people who would be looking for work. They're not young people who are still in education and, 6 years off finding a role. What we've seen in the Youth Voice Census for the last 3 years, as we see anxiety, mental health, and well-being decline, is we also see almost a revert to stereotype and a revert to type for young people too. So actually taking a risk, and if you are a young woman, you are the least likely to be considering engineering. It feels as though we've gone back in time, taking a risk and being able to choose something that feels slightly different to what you might have chosen, or slightly different to what your family's always done or what everyone else in your classroom has done, is a real worry. And again, particularly for those groups of young people where taking a risk is highest. So for young people, particularly with free school meals, young people with any protected characteristics are least likely to take those risks in those moments and in those opportunities too. There is a real need for organisations and sector bodies to work together again. And when I think back to 10 years ago, the campaigns that we were supporting and leading for women in engineering, but any engineering opportunities, those inspiration campaigns are really vital. It's really important that we continue those. And that's going to be challenging because we are all looking at our cost bases. We're all looking at what we can do next. And sometimes it can be hard to think, gosh, I'm going to go and stand in front of a group of year sevens and tell them about engineering, or I'm going to go and tell them about care roles, or I'm going to go and tell them about healthcare. But actually, if we don't do that now, we don't fix this problem. We'll continue to have young people who are only looking at either what they can see and what they know, but we don't allow our organisations to thrive and consider that again too. So yeah, a real worrying concern around almost old stereotypes, and again, particularly for young men and young women, and young men in particular feeling more frustrated by systems. There are a group of young men that continuously every year within the census believe that they won't get any of these other jobs, that it's only young women that are going to succeed. And it's really important to highlight that young men get typically twice the amount. They get twice the amount of opportunities that young women do. They are twice as likely to get work experience. They are twice as likely, if they are in work, to be in slightly better work, but actually half as happy in all of it. And a lot of that is to do with having networks and connections in the workplace, in education, and in mentoring opportunities too. Actually, their happiness and their frustration in that system is a real concern that we have. And we can see young women we can see young women doing better. They're getting slightly better. We're being able to connect it more to what is really being able to work. And we are seeing the impact and the joy that we can have for young women in raising their aspirations. And we really do have to level that out again across the systems. Now, when we're looking at where young people, so they might have decided they know the skills employers are looking for, they might have decided what sector they're looking for. When we think about where they find it, for the most part, young people are looking on employers' websites or profiles that they have on organisations like Youth Employment UK. They want to be able to land on a space that tells them about the employer, that tells them that this is a good place for young people to work, that tells them that there are other young people that work there, or there is a great benefit to the organisation, a place that's written for them to be able to access. And what I mean by that is that it is youth friendly, it is accessible to them in their language, that they don't necessarily have to scroll through 5 pages of company reporting or whatever it is that an organisation might do or have. After that, young people are looking across social media. What we found across the Youth Voice census is that for the most part, social media for the most groups of young people was a way of kind of checking back on the culture of the organisation. It wasn't almost the first place they looked for jobs, and it tended to be that an organisation had popped up, particularly if it was TikTok, they popped up within it, and it was more a reminder of something they'd seen before. They liked to see that reminder, that again, kind of almost like subliminal messaging that this organisation exists and it's for them. What I will say, particularly social media was a great place for young people who didn't have protected characteristics. It wasn't always the most popular for young people who did have protected characteristics. And sometimes that's because we get one message across social media sometimes, and we want to show off our organisation as this great, vibey, buzzy place to work, which is an important thing. But actually, if you have levels of anxiety, if you have additional needs, if you are if you are an Asian young woman and that's not what you're seeing, because that's not what the advert or the profile of the story tell, it can sometimes be a disengagement point for those who are disadvantaged, particularly when it comes up on social media. When you think about the algorithm, it's trying to show me things that are for me, and actually it can instantly detract from that when you're looking across there. For the most part, personal networks remain a good place for young people to find, and actually again, with protected characteristics, are least likely. The majority of young people who did not have any disadvantage were utilising personal networks. They had found their job through somebody, and it's really worrying that that is how roles are filled, particularly when we think about those neat figures, who we are, like how we are trying to close the youth employment gap. If it continues to be through personal networks that young people hear about and find jobs, we continue to leave those behind who haven't done it. Whilst over half of young people had used AI in the last 12 months, the majority of them had used it to ask all sorts of, I don't want to say inane questions, but all sorts of different questions. They were just asking it to be able to do. Few admitted to using it for their schoolwork or their working life, but actually even less had said that they'd used it for job hunting. And there's some really interesting research that Movement to Work have put out recently too, in terms of the value of an AI tool being able to support young people, particularly those who are disadvantaged and need. I know they're trialling it with some job centres, particularly in the Northeast, actually having a computer ask you some questions about your skills can be a great way of practicing with young people too. So it is something that we'll be building into the Youth Employment UK website in a safe, secure place that will only utilise and pull data from our trusted sources. So in terms of AI, we'll be ensuring that young people can use it safely and securely and are able to utilise it in a way that they can think about the skills that they have, that we can tell them what skills they have and how brilliant they are, which is what they need when they sit in front of an employer. All too often, it's where they fall down. What we know from young people when they are looking for an employer, the biggest factors for young people is an employer who pays fairly. That transport, access to work, and being able to afford basics and necessaries is absolutely a fundamental right for young people. When we think about paying fairly, it isn't extortionate salaries, and actually 10% of young people who are currently on apprenticeships were looking for another job. This isn't about wanting super sky high wages. This is about being able to afford to live and travel to where they work in a good way. They also wanted to be provided with opportunities to progress and be promoted. It's really important to think about the level of anxiety young people have, the skill development they've missed since COVID-19. They are really hyper aware that they still need opportunities to grow and develop. They still want programs within the workforce and the workplace to know that they are going to continue to be supported to do that. And they really wanted a place where it felt supportive and inclusive. Actually, young people were looking for a youth-friendly badge, a measure, a way of knowing that actually other young people have worked here before and it's been really good for them. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you're an organisation with 500 young people working there, but actually it's about being able to say we're committed to this, we're working towards improving those services too. Because for the most part, very few young people believe that there is a good job where they live. 14% are confident or very confident there'll be quality jobs in their local area. And actually, there is a moment to think about how you can showcase that you are quality, how you can showcase that you're an employer that is doing their best on a journey and learning about what it takes to be a good youth employer. But particularly young people who have had less careers exposure, know less about sectors, industries and employers, where we want to connect them to SMEs and first jobs for those young people. Having a badge, having a way of monitoring what that quality work is really, really important for them too. Otherwise, they simply don't know. So how do we build inclusivity? What I wanted to do is just be able to show what that means for young people. So we take 100% of young people who are looking for work right now, and we build a job spec for that young person, and we require them to have passed English, GCSE, and maths. We cut our potential work force down by 40%. Now, if we require them to write a CV without no help and support, we lose another 5% off of that. If you require them to have work experience, and when I say this, employers are like, oh no, you don't have to have work experience. But actually, for a lot of employers, when they really look at who's passing assessment centres and who's passing interviews, it is young people who are able to talk about having had work experience before. It's not that you're designing jobs that young people have to have had work experience, but actually, if you don't do more inclusive recruitment practices, you will always find that young people with work experience pass the programs, and those that don't do that too. And when we think about how young people can find and access that work locally, that then comes down to kind of 10% of people, or like 10% of that workforce again. Actually, that 10% of young people who know how to get a job where they live, what a good employer is, happy to work for an SME, able to be able to do that too. So they can look at your job application and job advert and go, okay, I know where to look, I know where to find it, I know how to access it, and I've got all of the right work. If we don't design jobs for young people and we don't look at how we can build those multiple networks and gain feedback on what we're doing, upskill those young people and train our line managers, what we've got and what we'll continue to do is only hire the 10% of people who probably would have been all right before you designed your apprenticeship program, if I'm totally honest with you. What we know though is being inclusive is about doing small changes and lots of things really well. The Good Youth Employment Benchmark, which the results of which we launched earlier this month, for employers that are getting this right, they aren't always the large corporates, but actually they're thinking about multiple networks and multiple avenues. So yes, they're working with local schools, local colleges. Yes, they might have a link with the job centre, but it is about going in at really understanding who your local workforce is, sitting with groups in the job centre and understanding what they think the barriers are, and being able to think about what the barriers are that they might be having, and how then not just your job advert can be designed to allay some of those fears, but how the actual program that you're going to put those people on within your local area is going to benefit them and be able to make it successful for both parties too. Those multiple networks will need to include youth groups, youth organisations and charities working with partners who can specialise and be able to access it too. We're super proud at Youth Employment UK that not just 4 million young people can utilise and access our website across a year, but actually those networks in terms of neat young people, the hardest to reach. If you are going to reach the hardest to reach, it is harder to do. Of course it is. That's why we are here and in these moments. We have to think about how we target those and make it part of the mission in the very beginning. I'll stop there. Otherwise, I'll only just tell you more things to do, and that is part of what our membership is about. And I'll hand to LJ.
Amazing. Thanks, Lauren. I'm watching the clock and I will make sure that we finish in just a minute, but it's really important to share two things with you. You've heard how we're influencing the policy agenda, but also I want to just share how we're helping young people. So consistently since 2012, young people have said to us, we don't know what careers exist. We don't know how to build our skills if their school provision and their networks don't help with that. And so back in 2014, after hearing that for a number of years, we built a comprehensive skills and careers website, which we have, and I've linked into the chat. And as Lauren says, we're seeing over 4 million young people use that site to gather access to support, to information, to connect to employers, to access virtual work experiences, and so much more. We signpost out to mental health support and charities. It is a front door to all the things that young people tell us they need every year in the Youth Voice Census. It is a great website. Schools and colleges on this call, but also across the country, are using it as we're a recommended partner for the Careers and Enterprise Company, for the Department for Work and Pensions, and the Department for Education. It is impartial. It meets Gatsby benchmarks. It's excellent. So I know the schools and colleges and councils on here, if you're not using the career support and inspiration support that comes with the Youth Employment UK website with your young people, please do. It is free, always and always on. Next slide, Lauren, please. One of the things that we want to do, as Lauren says, is help those employers in our network and new employers really become great employers of young people. This is vital if we're to tackle youth unemployment. So we have forever held a standard of what good youth employment is to young people, and last year created a membership package so that employers of all sizes can gain access to our monthly webinars, to our online content and resources, to our advice, to our guidance, to our best practice, but also to the Good Youth Employment Benchmark, which is our tool that allows you to audit and measure your own practice. Membership is the thing that sustains all the other work that we do. It's the thing that allows us to keep the lights on and provide free careers advice to young people. It is part of a CSR approach to many employers, as well as a very practical tool on how we help HR practitioners, early careers leaders, work experience, apprenticeship managers become great employers and organisations for young people. Membership starts at £250 a year as a not-for-profit. This is not a service that's about making huge amounts of money. It's a service about ensuring our kind of sustainability whilst changing that youth employment landscape. So if you are not yet a member, the membership information is going in the chat function now, and we really do encourage you to take a look. At our symposium, which is our annual conference that we held just a week or so ago, all of our videos and content and resources are on there, but also what you can see as you can see, employers like Haven, like Severn Trent, like Coca-Cola, really talking about the value, the return on investment that membership has given to them this year. So please do take a look at that and really consider, as you're thinking about budgets for the end of this year or indeed for next, how you can be part of a network that is championing and changing the landscape for young people.